Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. I'm Maricel Dision, and I'm the Managing Director of Women of Influence Plus. Today's conversation explores sponsorship as a leadership skill with real impact. We're joined by two leaders bringing deep insight and lived experience. I'd like to introduce Helen Tubb, Leadership Advisor and INSEAD recognized researcher, whose work is reshaping how organizations think about sponsorship, and Navneet Rishikeshan, Senior Director and Associate General Counsel at Cisco, who brings personal experience championing high potential talent from underrepresented groups. Navneet and Helen, thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
Of course. Now, to our valued audience members, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the comment section, and we will try our very best to get to as many of them as possible. Now, let's dive in. So, Helen, I would love to kick things off with you. Let's start with providing a bit of clarity to our audience. What is sponsorship, and how is it different from mentorship or coaching in practice?
That's a really great place to start, because although the sponsorship term has been around for, well, more than a decade, it's still poorly understood and not so well practiced in the everyday of organizations. So to start defining it, let me compare it to mentorship as an example. A mentor is where a senior or more experienced person is providing advice and guidance and support based on their greater path traveled. And in practice, they're likely to be doing that very much in a one-to-one interaction with the individual involved, and very much from the sidelines to enable that individual to move forward. Now, by contrast, a sponsor is where that very same senior or experienced person is not only interacting with that individual, but they're also pivoting to interact with their own peers and their own seniors and in their own circles. And they're leveraging their own reputation and power within the organization to really create those mission critical opportunities and to advocate for that individual. So really they're kind of leaning in a lot more and often doing it in rooms where that individual might not even be present. I thought we could jump to my code, which is a nice way for people to remember the four main behaviors of sponsorship based on my research and working practice. So C is for connect. So that means a sponsor is going to be really opening doors and introducing that individual into networks and circles and tiers of the organization that they might ordinarily not have access to. Open is where they are actively creating those career critical opportunities, such as being invited to present in a senior meeting, leading a high stakes project, and having opportunities that really demonstrate capability and leadership and talent potential. D is for defend. So bearing in mind you're bringing someone who might be underrepresented in the business, that means you also have their back. You're defending them and really resisting against that unfair criticism and when those biases come into play and into the conversation. And then finally, E is for endorse. So that means really being their champion in every possible situation where you're really singing their praises, shining a light on what they can do, and really kind of creating that light that enable you to be seen as leadership or talent potential to progress your career.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Helen. Now, I'd love to layer that on with some lived experience. And Navneet, this question is for you. What does sponsorship now look like in your leadership practice, and how do you identify and support high potential talent?
Sure, Marisol, thank you. So let me start with the second one first, I think, right? So the way we look at teams and we look at potential is really and it's still a work in progress, to be honest. So we're trying to reach a common definition of what we believe as leaders a high potential talent should be, right? So in our case, for example, in our department, we look for certain skills or certain traits, right? So they could be as varied as inquisitiveness, creativity, right? Technical ability, obviously, right? As lawyers, you you need to have some ability to work with documents, and then you look at it from a, and then you layer it on with a process, right? So I think the critical thing for you as an organization is, and particularly when you're looking at sponsorship, right? Uh, it's there's a recent study that I was mentioning to Helen. It's by Professor Alex Edmonds from the Diversity Project North America, right? And it talks about cognitive diversity and the importance of having different perspectives or different demographies in your organization. And usually you land up in a scenario where if the demography is not diverse, you could land up in a scenario where there is no cognitive diversity, right? So and I do, when I look at it, it really one of the things, DEI is a, particularly what's happening in your neighborhood, Maricel, is a very critical topic of discussion today. But one thing I've always found problematic is that the fact that I comes right at the end, right? I would think it actually does start with inclusion. So it's not enough to just have diversity of talent. It's also important that you include them, and I think that's where sponsorship comes in. So the way we go about it is, once you identify people, and we don't differentiate, demographies when we identify people who are high potential, you then move into kind of we call it mentoring, right? Which is not probably the right term, Helen. It should probably be sponsorship. But it's all about, we build a process in place. So so let's say, Helen is the high potential talent for my department. Then it's my job as a leader to make sure that she has access to different leaders within the company, right? And we normally recommend two types. So one is somebody in your organizational chain, right? So someone who is either a peer to your manager or manager's manager. So that kind of gives you a sponsorship element within your organization, right? But additionally, we also ask for someone additional who is outside the reporting chain, right? Because the feeling is that sometimes people feel a little nervous talking to folks who report to the same people that you do, right? So having someone a little outside. Now, this may only be possible in large organizations like Cisco, but I think the idea being that you provide, you have a process in place which enables this, as opposed to allowing it to happen organically between individuals, because we find that hasn't really worked that well, right? It has to be a conscious action. So, not sure I answered both your questions, Marisol, but that's kind of where we are going, right?
You have. And, I apologize. This question is actually not in our prep sheet, but I'm going to ask it and pose it to you both. Could we talk a little bit about how sponsorship positively impacts someone's career? How does it make an impact on their career trajectory and their professional growth?
I'm happy to jump in first and even cite some data, particularly from the Center for Talent Innovation in the US. They've done a number of studies looking at the career advancement of women and other underrepresented talent, and showing a progression of 19% compared to those who are under-sponsored. But I would also add, there is also career progression for those who are doing the sponsoring. Because they're actually tapping into talent that might ordinarily be overlooked. And actually, they have career advancement up to 53%, according to that particular study. So I think that shows that actually, if we can bring forward the benefits for both parties in terms of career and leadership growth, that's also a way of making it more interesting for all parties involved.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, whether we like it or not, right? All of us have gone through some level of sponsorship. I think that's always been the case. The it used to be very much, and particularly from a gender perspective or even a cultural perspective, right? So, having grown up in India, the the advantage I've had over other Asians, for example, is the fact that I English is kind of a native language, right? So you understand, and so that's not just about the language you speak; it's also about the jokes you get, right? Or the conversations you are able to do, and that sometimes helps you to build a bond with somebody senior, and they become sponsors, right? I mean, in most organizations, you will not grow unless it's not just enough for your leader to be, you know, advocating for you. You also need others to be advocating for you, right? And that's true for definitely true for Cisco. It's true for most large organizations as well. So how do you enable that? Just because you don't speak English or you don't understand English jokes or American jokes for that matter, it should not limit your ability to grow or to be identified as someone, who deserves support or sponsorship. And 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 that's why we focus more on making it a requirement, right? So I don't think we have reached the stage yet, Helen, of people getting elevated because they have been sponsors, but I think it really adds one more skill to your cure, right? And if I can mix the analogies here, and I think that it's just been, I think there is a concern sometimes about, particularly on a sponsorship issue, right? It's about how do you feel or how do you perceive, right? So from a sponsee, if that's the right term, right? You feel concerned about going and asking someone, hey, can you talk to me, right? Or can you reach out, can I reach out to you with questions or advice? And sometimes also the sponsor feels a little nervous doing it because they feel, oh, am I, will I be perceived wrongly, right? So if you make it a actual program and you actually enforce it in that sense, you may even give quotas to people, right? That kind of removes that barrier, and it makes it, to your point, Helen, makes it something which people believe will help them. And I think the focus should be more on helps them learn as opposed to, I think Marisol, you and I were talking about how I don't like to talk about diversity from a business standpoint, right? In the sense, there's enough data out there, by the way, which shows that a diverse leadership team, for example, helps you to grow as a company, right? While that is important, and I think that helps push some people to get more involved, I don't like to enforce that too much or focus on that too much, because for me this is something that you should want to do because it's the right thing to do, right? And not just because, hey, I'll make more money this way, right? So similarly, I think from a sponsorship perspective, I don't want to focus too much on this will help you grow in your career. uh, it should be about, from a sponsor standpoint, it should be, I want to do it because it's the right thing to do. From a sponsee standpoint, I think it should probably be, if that's the right term, that you are doing this to learn, right? And not necessarily because you'll get promoted because, uh, Marisol is talking to you or Helen is talking to you. So I think that's a little bit of a context there, which we try to use, and make it a program so that everybody gets the opportunity to do it, right? And not just a few because they are the right demographic or gender or whatever it is.
Could I just come in there on that point that Navneet sparked? Because you're absolutely right around the learning and the growth rather than pure promotion per se. And I think that's an aspect that's often overlooked. I find routinely in conversations where I'm talking about sponsorship, people naturally think, it's about that final end of year promotion decision and whether the sponsor is advocating for you at that particular point in time. And I think that limits our understanding of sponsorship and all the everyday opportunities and behaviors that are so fundamental to enable someone to grow and learn in their career. That example, as I said, of presenting in a senior meeting or taking on a stretch assignment, those might not necessarily be the linear building blocks to a promotion, but they definitely enable that person to learn and grow and connect with other people in ways that they wouldn't have done before. And I think that also takes the pressure off the individuals involved, because then they're not feeling under pressure that by the end of the next year, suddenly some very tangible outcome has to be delivered. It's a relationship where the two individuals are getting to know each other. The leader is opening up about their own leadership challenges to some degree. There's a two-way flow. And so that through that trust, it's a relationship that can actually seed lots of different positive outcomes, not purely the kind of promotion as a pure end game.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for making that point, Helen, because that really differentiates and puts sponsorship in the light of it's not transactional, right? This is cultivating a relationship. And specifically when we're talking about cultivating a relationship in the workplace, we do need to navigate perceptions of those relationships, and how making sponsorship formal could help us deal with that. So my follow-up question then is to Navneet. and it's particularly around navigating misperceptions. How have you navigated potential misperceptions on your end when sponsoring across lines of difference? And what advice do you have for leaders who may find themselves in that position?
I think we just, there's no magic bullet, right? I think but where you start is basically I think all of us have biases, right? And you need to be aware of them, right? And you need to find ways to be present, right, and to engage. I think that's, fundamentally at a very base level, that's it, right? So employees like to feel that their leaders are interested in them as individuals. So that means, and this is something I need to work on myself personally, which is to be present without trying to respond or trying to react, right? And then just listen sometimes. Uh, let me try and maybe give an example, right? So I think whether we like it or not, particularly in Asia, right, there is, and not just Asia, right? Even in Europe, you can see this, or the US, certain genders have more responsibilities in the home, right? Whether we like it or not. That's the societal kind of structure that we have built over the centuries. So, what does that mean if your team has a larger number of women? I think it's just about being aware of their situation. And so, if you have grown up in an environment where it's standard for you to finish your meetings and then go out for dinner or drinks in the evening, maybe you change that, right, to make it more inclusive. So maybe instead of a team dinner, you do a team lunch, right? So and we have changed that, actually, and I have changed that in my team, where we don't do dinners anymore, right? So we'll do a lunch. So firstly, it's within the office hours, so you are not imposing on their personal time. But more importantly, there are people with elderly parents or children or other responsibilities, and why should you take that away from them? And because you do run the risk otherwise of that becoming kind of a gating factor, right? You end up having dinner with someone, and you know that person better, and invariably it's you'll find, if you organize a team dinner, for example, it's the male gender who is more present, right? Just to not put too fine a point on it. So I think it's all about trying to be conscious of what's happening around you, and trying to build a level playing field, if you can call it that, right? And it does not necessarily mean that, and obviously communicate clearly, right, and explain it. So there may be misconceptions on your part, there may be misconceptions on the other side. It's all about being present and talking to people and trying to build an environment that works for everyone, right?
Thank you for that, Navneet. Now, Helen, could we layer on how formalizing sponsorship in the workplace can help leaders navigate these potential misperceptions? Your research actually highlights the risks of informal sponsorship. What are the downsides of leaving this to chance, and how can formalizing it help?
Yeah. It leads very nicely into what Navneet just talked about, insofar as leaving it to evolve organically. It came through my research from the interviews that, well, for a start, when I was looking at talking to my leaders from a gender perspective, statistically speaking, over 2/3 were saying that gender, for example, possibly or definitely influenced the sponsorship experience, which was quite a compelling statistic. But then when I dug deeper into the commentary for that result, but also the interviews themselves, it really showed how they were less worried around the interaction between themselves and their counterpart, the sponsor and the sponsee. In fact, they were more mindful of the reactions amongst their team members, their colleagues, and the wider organization. Things like misperceptions, rumors, false discourse circulating around what is the motivation behind the fact that these two individuals are, engaged in a collaborative relationship around careers that involve some degree of sponsorship. From an organizational psychology point of view, this is something that's called social defense mechanisms, and to formalize enables you to put some normality into that system whereby you're introducing structures, explaining roles and expectations. You're building it into the narrative of this is part of leadership because we believe in inclusivity. It means also that resources and support are provided because to build up those trusting relationships and for others to see it in a positive light, that's very much needed. So that's why I'm really advocating for formalizing, and which can happen in lots of different ways. It doesn't always have to be a standalone program, but definitely moving the needle to ensure that it's something that's guided and supported rather than being ad hoc and often falling then to a very small minority set of people within the organization.
Absolutely. Now, for both of you, how can organizations embed sponsorship into culture so that it's systemic, not situational? Where do organizations begin? Perhaps they begin a little informally before they really formalize and build out a program. But where do we start? Where do we start to build a culture of sponsorship?
Maybe I'll kick it off, Helen, and you can add some more
Thanks.
color to it. More knowledgeable color, I might add. I think it has to be a little intentional right up front, right? So I'll maybe give an example from my my experience. There was we do sometimes offer or as a reward, right? Give it allow people to go and attend certain events, right, in Cisco. So Cisco being a large company, we have several events all across the globe. Sometimes we will identify a high potential talent and send them and give them free tickets to go attend a Cisco event, right, in, let's say, in San Diego or somewhere nice. And part of the situation I found myself in once was uh, some of these events require you to actually share a room, right? And the idea came from from organizationally, somebody thought it's a great idea that you could stay in the same room as somebody from some other part of the globe, from Cisco, and you would get to know somebody outside your normal sphere of work, right? Now, the challenge we had was that one of my employees, and I didn't actually think of it when I was going through it, but one of the employees I was sending was in a same-sex relationship, right? And then the question suddenly it occurred to me. I said, "Hang on, we are sending you to this place to share a room with another employee of the same gender. How does that make you feel, right? I mean, how do you? It sounds a little uncomfortable, right?" And the person responded saying, "Don't worry about it. I'll just expense it," right? uh, so I said, "That's fine, but you will please, you will expense it and Cisco will pay for it," right? The fact that you had to take a separate room all to yourself. What that made me believe, or that made me think, is that somebody well-meaning, right, well-meaning process was set up by someone who did not think about this demographic, right? And they didn't think about how this would make somebody feel, who was not the normal in that sense, right? If you can call it normal, of that demographic. They were thinking only from their perspective. So it's very important when you have these policies being set up, and as part of Cisco's Pride network, we run the chapter in India, and we make sure that we look at all the policies from LGBTQ perspective to make sure that that perspective is coming in, right? Because otherwise you'll end up in a demographic which is not diverse, and you'll end up making rules which may work for some sets of the people but not for the others, right? So when you are trying to embed sponsorship into your culture, you have to be intentional right up front, right? Make sure that you're trying to cover as many of the demographies as you can, uh, while realizing that in some countries that may be difficult, especially if you're going down, let's say, LGBTQ uh, demographies are not necessarily legal in some countries, right? So you have to be intentional about it, and you probably sometimes have to take a global perspective on it as you go through it, right? I hope that makes sense.
Yes. Helen, anything to add to this?
Yes. I think it really comes back to our very first question around what is sponsorship. When I launched or published the research a couple of years ago and then started talking about it, I didn't realize how much I would have to take a step back to explain what sponsorship is, and not necessarily say to other things are off the table. Mentoring and coaching, can do wonderful things as well, but to really raise awareness around the fact that there is still a very big sponsorship gap in many organizations. And if we want to close that gap, this is what sponsorship really means in practice. So I think the starting point is to really start gradually that sensitization, to raise awareness and understand in your own organization, wherever you are, well, what is the degree of the sponsorship gap? And that's why I particularly like your report, Maricel, from Women of Influence Plus, where you really looked at some latest data around the degree to which women, for example, are under-sponsored still in the workplace, even though this term has been around. And then beyond the awareness raising stage, I would say with if you're looking for cultural change, we really need to work with the leaders. Yes, we can. And I think back to my earlier career when I had no clue that sponsorship was anything, and I, kind of stumbled through for many years, not really leveraging my sponsorship opportunities. So yes, we can raise awareness amongst our upcoming underrepresented talent, but we really need to overlay it with working far more closely with the leaders who need to be far more intentional to lead into this type of everyday practice. And if we can do that in a way where key executives are involved, it's maybe piloted in a part of the organization, then I think that's the real catalyst for over time driving that systemic and cultural change.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your perspective on that. And I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to jump to our last question. But before that, I do want to share that I have been on the receiving end of some incredible sponsors who have changed the trajectory of my career. And for me, sponsorship showed up as speaking my name in rooms of opportunity, seeing my potential before I could see it for myself, but also putting me in a position where I had to action and embody that potential before I even believed I was ready. And as a result, I was given opportunities and stretch goals very early on in my career, and I credit a lot of my success and growth, particularly to that. Thank you both for being champions of this. I really appreciate it. I'm sure many who have joined us today do as well. So I will end with this. What is one action a leader can take this month to move from passive support to really being active in sponsorship? And one action a rising professional, a sponsee, if you will, Navneet, that is totally your term, you can own that one, can take to invite it in.
Sure. So maybe I'll kick that off again, Helen, if that's okay. I think the one action as a leader, so again, depending on where you are, I think you need to speak up, right? And I think you need to. There was a question I think I was noticing where someone asked whether it should be intentional, and as an enterprise level, how do we build the right systems in place, right? I think you should raise it. I think unless you ask about it or you talk to the relevant leaders about it, I don't think it will happen, right? So if you don't have a system in your organization for sponsorship, I think you should raise it and you should ask about it and say, do we have any plans to do this, right? Might take a while to get there, but I think usually you find people like to do the right thing, right? So I think that's, as a leader, I would suggest you to bring it up, encourage your peers and your teams to take part if the system is there, or ask for one if there isn't one. As a rising professional, I think be open to feedback, give feedback, ask for help, right? Focus on the learning. So, there are sometimes the most interesting conversations or more helpful conversations actually don't take place in a formal environment. Sometimes it's informal. But be open about it. And if there is a formal system in place, either ask. If there isn't one, please ask for it. If there is one, then please take advantage of it, right? And focus on the learning. I think that's all we can do, right?
Thank you, Navneet.
So to follow through then on the leader side and focusing on maybe the behavioral side for leaders, I would say that even with, the organizational definition of leadership potential and the criteria that we might use as to what a leadership potential looks like, that isn't an absolute truth. There are always hidden talent that we're not seeing. So I think just simply thinking about who might I be missing out of all of the team members or staff I interact with, who's one extra person who's on the periphery who I don't know very well, who is kind of different or apparently different in some way or implicitly, who I might actually arrange to have a coffee with and just to learn a little bit more about their career and what they do in the business. That's a very, very simple step. It doesn't take a major amount of time, but it starts really expanding your own sphere of influence and seeing potential that you might have overlooked previously. And then for aspiring professionals, I would say it doesn't mean changing all of the staff that or senior staff that you might currently be interacting with. A good starting point are those that you might see as your coaches and mentors. Sometimes they themselves don't realize that they could do something a little bit extra to help advocate for you in new spaces, and simply they weren't aware of the term or what it means in practice. So that's a good place to start, because you have confidence and trust in those individuals, and you might be able to explore the avenues for them doing a little bit more sponsoring, or who they might be able to refer you on to who could take on a sponsorship role in the future.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to time. It flew by. I thank you both for sharing a piece of your evening with us. I know it's getting late for you, Helen, and it's quite late for you already, Navneet. Thank you to our wonderful audience members, as always, for joining us. Be sure to watch the replay and to connect with both Helen and Navneet. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.